On the 19th of March, 2005, Farkhunda Malikzada went to her local mosque in the center of the Afghan capital, Kabul. There, she's a student of Islam. She was there to talk to a local mullah. When she arrived, she got into an argument with him. He then accused her of being an American agent who had burnt the Quran. Suddenly, a mob surrounded the mosque. Over 100 men yelling, beat her, kill her. Farkhunda was dragged out of the mosque as she pleaded for her life, saying that she was a Muslim and she hadn't burnt the Quran. But they wouldn't listen. As they dragged her out of the mosque, they began to stone her, hurling stones at each other and hurling stones at her. They were telling each other to continue to beat her. She was dragged for 300 feet, her face covered in blood. Surprisingly, she was conscious. She stood up. She'd realized her headscarf had been dragged off her head. They continued to beat this woman, and then they ran her over with a car before throwing her into the Kabul River and setting her body alight. Her clothing so drenched in blood that it wouldn't catch on fire. So the men decided to use their own clothes to continue to burn this woman. The story of Farkhunda is not unique. It is the story of thousands of women in Afghanistan who face oppression, who don't have a voice. Afghanistan remains a place that's very close to my heart. I was born there, it's the country of my birth. And when I hear about stories like Farkhunda, I think about my own life and wonder how different it would be had I not left the country. I was 6 months old when my family decided that they couldn't stay or remain in the country. The year was 1983. My father had just returned from what was Czechoslovakia at the time, and he had studied architecture there. He'd been away for 7 years. And he came to a country that was on the brink of war, and he was about to be conscripted into the army. And he decided this was not a place that he wanted to raise his young family. About a year later, I was born, and at 6 months, my family carried me on horseback with my 2 older siblings over the border into Pakistan. 2 years later, I arrived in Australia, where I studied journalism, where I learnt to dream, where I learnt that I could bring about change in my own right, and that my destiny would not be that of Farkhunda's. As a journalist working for the BBC, I believe I have a strong platform to bring about change. I travel right around the world. I meet people from all parts of the world who tell me about their story. And I've realized the importance of storytelling through the work that I do, in understanding people's aspirations, in understanding their identity. And as a woman, I've realized that actually, even though our stories are different, what we aspire for is very much the same. We all seek happiness. We want to fall in love. We want a great career. And I'm sure 27-year-old Farkhunda was aspiring for all of these things. And when I travel from Iraq to South Sudan or Yemen and I hear these stories, I think, how could my life have been different? And it could have been had my parents not made that decision to leave the country. Most recently, I traveled back to my country of birth, Afghanistan, where I compiled a report on one of the most popular TV stations in the country. It's called Tolo News. It's an audacious TV channel that challenges the authority, challenges the rule of the Taliban. There are young people, just like you, between the ages of 20 and 25, who report every day on the situation in their country, fearlessly and with courage. Imagine if you did a report on someone and they weren't happy with it. What would your punishment be? Would it be death? Well, for this TV station, that's exactly what they faced. This is Shakila. Shakila Ibrahim Khail is roughly about 35 years old. She doesn't really know her exact age. Like so many people in Afghanistan who don't have birth certificates, she wasn't able to tell me, but she was able to identify certain periods in time so that she could give me a rough sense of when she was born. She's one of the senior reporters at Tolo News. Tolo News did a series of reports about a war in northern Afghanistan most recently. In that report, they said the Taliban had raped some women. The Taliban weren't happy with this. They issued them with a threat. They said that they would kill members of Tolo staff. Then, on the 20th of January this year, as a busload of Tolo journalists left the TV station, a car bomb, a car full of explosives trailed the car. And as they went through the streets of Kabul, it was detonated. 20 people were left injured, 7 dead. Many of them Shakila's own colleagues. This is the reality for so many young people living in that country. Within the TV station, to me, they look like young people who could be sitting in this auditorium or in the streets of New York or in London. But when they leave their TV station, their reality is something very different. With Shakila, I spent about a week following her reports. We went to one of the local hospitals, and this is what we found.
چی پیام دارین به کسایی که مرمی میمانند بم میشنن در این سال نو من یک پدر چی پیام دارین مثلا کسایی که جنگ میکنن سال نو شد
جنگ دست بکش محبی وطن ما قرار شد امی جنگ و جنبات گم شد دیگه
خاطر که بسیار رنج بود شاید به خاطر که من یک مادر هستم زیاد کوشش میکنم احساسات به کنترل کنم اما نمیشه به خاطر از که نگران آینده از این طفلا می باشم به خاطر که طفلا را میبینم اولادای خود زیر نظر میاد و میفهم که آیندهشان خوب نمی باشه
This is reality in this country. Daily bombs are going off. And it's quite surprising that 16 years after the US-led invasion, that stories like Farkhunda would still happen in that country. That Shakila would walk into the hospital and find bed after bed of children without limbs. Since filing this report just 3 weeks ago, Shakila found living in the country unbearable, and she decided to take her 3 young children to Turkey. Actually, Shakila's story resembles that of the people whom she reports on a daily basis. She was married as a teenager during the years of the Taliban. She had 3 children, then her husband died. She started to work for Tolo TV after the fall of the Taliban. And for 11 years, she worked courageously and fearlessly until last week, when things became completely unbearable. And she joined the millions of refugees who've turned up on different shores, on different borders. And Shakila's story will not end there. She'll try and get to Europe. And many people say to me, I can't understand why someone would take their small child and make a dangerous journey across the ocean. And I think, I can. My family did that. My father did that. Would I be standing here today had he not? Would my story have been quite different? Would I be able to stand here with confidence and and tell you that I was a global journalist reporting across the world, wanting to give voice to the voiceless victims, a platform that I use? Probably not. Perhaps I would be like Farkhunda. Perhaps I would have aspirations to be a journalist and work for Tolo News. But for how long would I find the bombs going off in that country bearable before I would have to leave? There are many people in that country, though, who work for change, who are agents of change. This is Ariana Said. She's a singer. She's also a host at Tolo TV. She was there when the bomb went off and the bus was detonated. She was performing in one part of the auditorium, and she said she could hear it go off outside. And this is what she told me. This Tolo TV footage shows Ariana singing in the National Football Stadium in Kabul last year. She received threats for this performance. And due to security concerns, such an event might never be sanctioned today. For Ariana, everything changed after the attack on her colleagues. In this footage, Ariana's manager filmed her in their hotel trying on a bulletproof vest.
They actually have given this to me to wear when I'm going around in Kabul or when I'm going to the set to record Afghanistan. How funny is this? Being a singer in Afghanistan, I feel like I'm going to a war actually. This is ridiculous. And it's kind of heavy as well. But yeah, what to do? How do I look, by the way?
Ariana actually lives in London, but she goes back to Kabul because she feels she needs to help those who remain in the country, to help the women understand that there are choices that they can make despite the oppression, despite the difficulties that they face on a daily basis. And that's how I view what I do. I often get asked by young people, how can I bring about change? Do I need to go to a war zone? Do I need to travel to some faraway land? Actually, the change that you can bring is at your own doorstep, in your own communities. And so you don't have to go somewhere very far away. In fact, this country is dealing with its own refugee crisis. Perhaps you can go and meet some of the individuals there, that perhaps they're not just a sea of faces, that they too are a Shakila who had a job, had a life, had a career, and has left all that behind. And you realize that actually they're people too. They have the same aspirations, the same hopes as we do. And that's what I learn every time I leave my home in London and I go to Iraq or I go to South Sudan or I go to Pakistan. I realize our stories may be different, but our aspirations are exactly the same. Thank you.